So it turns out that the Playmates Shin Godzilla figure is perhaps the most surprising figure of the year so far for me.
This figure's been out for some time now. It released in 2022 at actual physical store locations at Targets, I believe, and it retailed for about $13 to $15 if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below. But long story short, I saw photos of this figure before it released and I thought it was actually kind of cool. I know this is definitely a step up from the abomination of their original Shin Godzilla figure that was released, I believe, a year or so ago. So that said, I did not pull the trigger on it at first. I really wasn't going to hunt this figure down at Targets. I don't have the time for that. And I didn't want to pay resale prices on eBay, $30, $45 and up for what is essentially a $15 figure. But lo and behold, I got lucky. I got this figure and the 1956 Rodan, also from Playmates, together in a bundle for about 30 bucks. So they're about 15 each. So I really wasn't paying much of a marked up price at all. With that said, I am so impressed by this figure. We have to establish that this is a children's toy generally marketed toward children. If we're adult collectors and we so happen to be picking these up, that's kind of the secondary nature of this figure, right? So from that perspective, I think in terms of the quality here, this is a very nicely done figure. First, starting with the paint is the worst part of this figure. There's not that much to it, and in certain sections, it just looks strange. That I'm willing to overlook. When it comes to the sculpt, however, this is where the figure excels. The sculpt on this thing is really nice. I'm not going to pretend that it is a super deep sculpt, nor is it technically screen accurate. The tip of the tail does not have the head. The striations throughout the body are there, but not as detailed as, more expensive figures. But I'm not going to compare this to other figures for the entirety of the review. We're going to look at this figure at face value here. So as you can see, as we go throughout the entirety of the body, there is a good sculpt there. You can see all the detailing, the lines, the striations, and it does give an overall good appearance towards Shin Godzilla's design, which is very grotesque and, just gross looking. Obviously, it has to be dulled down a little bit if it's a children's toy. If it looks like a bloody piece of meat, I don't think that would sell as well. But the head here definitely has a softer sculpt. That's probably the least best part of the rest of the sculpt. While the general shape of Shin Godzilla's head is there, the detail is a bit minimal. That also is because this figure is molded in a dark black plastic, and there's not a lot of paint to help bring out that sculpt. So it does suffer from that. The sculpt of the teeth is good, but interestingly enough, they've kind of made the teeth too straight in a way. They look like a normal row of teeth, whereas of course Shin Godzilla's teeth are very jagged, and he even has teeth growing outside on top of his mouth, on top of his head. So of course that's probably toned down a little bit. And interestingly also, they gave Shin Godzilla a tongue because he does not actually have a tongue. The inside of his mouth is that gross looking, whatever you want to call it. Here, it's kind of funny looking in a way, just to think. I mean, it's hard to tell. You'd have to really peek in there and see it. And then we work our way down. The neck looks good. The shape of the chest here, it does protrude out a little bit like in the film, but it's softened up a bit. It doesn't really come to a sharp point. And then we make our way to the arms, which actually look really good. They're very small, just like Shin Godzilla's arms are. They are kind of muscular. I guess that's what they sort of look like. But they are small, so it looks good. I love that sort of clenching pose. This really gives the idea that he's grasping at something or writhing in pain. And I think that this comes across really nicely in this figure in particular. The dorsals actually look pretty good. I think this is perhaps the best section of paint on the entire figure. It has a nice mix of red on top of the existing black plastic. And I think that looks pretty nicely done. The sculpt itself is pretty good. We work our way down the entirety of the dorsals toward the bottom of the body, work our way up the tail. The tail looks nice. Now, while the tip of the tail does lack a lot of detail, there's no face in it, and the sculpt is sort of mushy, I do think the overall tail, including the tip, has a great presence to it and a great shape that really adds to the silhouette of the figure itself. I can't say for sure if this tail is as long as it's supposed to be in proportion to the rest of the figure, but for the size of the figure and the rest of its body, I do think the tail does have a great length to it, and it does sell the idea that it is this tail that's always moving around and sort of looming behind Shin Godzilla. And I think when you see these angles here that I'm showing you, it just really looks exceptional at certain angles. And honestly, it's kind of one of my favorite tails I have on a Shin Godzilla figure. We'll take a look at the articulation in a little bit, but I think that also adds to the tail as well. The ability to move it around a little bit allows you to kind of play with the angles. So it could be behind Shin Godzilla, to the side of Shin Godzilla. So that really is another plus for this tail and for the overall figure itself. Now this figure actually has 8 points of articulation. The head, the arms, the legs, the feet, and the tail are all articulated. And while theoretically this does sound like a lot of points of articulation, there is some limitation to this figure. It does tend to fall over a lot because of the pose. So because of this pose, you sort of have to keep the legs at a very specific angle, including the feet, so it stands still. The tail does help balance that a bit, but because of this pose, it is a little limited with its ability to sort of move around a lot, but the arms can definitely be placed in different positions, as can the head, and the tail articulation is a really nice added touch that gives some life to the tail and the overall figure as well. This figure measures about 6.5 inches tall, and then when we take the tape measure to the tail, it's just under 7 inches tall, so the tail is slightly above Shin Godzilla's height itself. You can't really tell though because of the way it's so far out from the rest of the figure, but it does give some nice shelf presence to this figure. So now let's do some size comparisons with other figures. Overall, I'm pleasantly surprised with this figure. I knew when I first saw images of it before I got it that it was kind of cool. I thought it really appealed to me and it had a nice presence and overall sculpt to it. And now that I have it in hand, I think that sculpt really is there. The paint does bring it back a little bit, as well as the dark black plastic that the figure is molded in. But overall, I think Playmates really knocked this out of the park. I might be in the minority here when it comes to this because I know a lot of people aren't really big on their Shin Godzilla figures from Playmates, and I don't disagree with them, especially their original release. It's definitely kind of hard to look past that. But comparing this one to the original release from Playmates, this is such an improvement. And honestly, I'm really happy to have this in my collection. As a hardcore Shin Godzilla collector, this is a welcome addition to my collection that I think really has its own unique personality, and honestly one of my favorite poses in a Shin Godzilla figure. While the tail does lack detail, I think its overall appearance in conjunction with the rest of the figure has such a great silhouette. I love the arm pose, I love the head pose, I love the slightly open mouth. The whole thing just reeks Shin Godzilla. It is totally Shin Godzilla in pain, roaring, crying out in pain, whatever you want to say. This really captures the personality, or lack thereof, I guess, of Shin Godzilla. If you're a Shin Godzilla fan or just a Godzilla fan in general and you're looking to get a nice new figure at a relatively affordable price, assuming you're not paying reseller prices, I think this is a great addition to anyone's collection. And I think this figure has a lot of potential for a repaint, and that is exactly what I'm going to be doing. So stay tuned for that, because I'm going to do a full video on my whole painting process of this figure. Anyway, that does it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun making it. If you're new to the channel and you like the video, please leave a like, consider taking a look at my other Godzilla figure content on the channel as well, and consider subscribing. Also, follow me on Instagram at Total Approximation, where I post Godzilla toy photography each week. Thank you for watching, and have a good one.